Welcome back to episode 7 of Rift with Friends. Today we are joined by Collin K, owner of Challenger TCG, and one of the most recognizable competitive names in Riftbound so far. With multiple top finishes in several events like CCS and notably the Regional Qualifier in Atlanta, CTCG has become a huge name in the community. For viewers discovering you, what's the origin story behind the brand and its rise in the TCG world?
Yeah, it's been obviously a meteoric rise that we've had coming into Riftbound. But for a lot of people who don't know us, everyone who's on the team has been playing card games for a very long time. I personally have had card games be my life for forever. As far as I remember, I was a 13-year-old kid showing up to my local game store once upon a time, and really exploring the hobby, obviously starting with Magic, as most people did, as well as Yu-Gi-Oh! A little bit as a kid. I've been working in card stores my entire life and competing on the side, kind of doing a little bit of everything. And through that, I met a lot of the friends who I then kind of incorporated into the team just through various games that I played. Typically, much smaller ones are the ones that I competed in, just because that's where I found money to be a little bit easier, as opposed to Magic, where you're going into a field where everyone's played hundreds of thousands of games. I think one of my strengths as a player is kind of being able to analyze a new game and pick it up very quickly, right? As we've kind of seen with the Riftbound, and me being able to win the first event, being the Charlies, and still having good success since then, right? So, honestly, we're just kind of like a ragtag group of friends who we picked up. I basically been playing card games for so long, I picked up a friend here or there. Eventually, Alex was one of our original founders who kind of put me onto Riftbound in the first place and kind of organized the team to a degree. And ever since then, we've grown a little bit. We've been pretty happy with where our team's at right now. So since our most recent pickups and Min and Coco, we've kind of stopped on the recruiting for a little while. But that's just kind of been our thing. And it's just honestly just a group of friends who are excited to be able to play card games and teach people the best ways to play card games.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun interviewing Coco. He was a great guest. Was there a point where you realized that like Riftbound was more than just like a casual game, or I guess like were you a League of Legends player that kind of fell in love with the IP and then you found Riftbound, or were you just a TCG fan and then found the card game, and then was there a point where you realized the card game was a little bit more than just another game for you to pick up?
Honestly, it really was just another card game for me to start. But previous card games I played, we only really played for the prizing, right? That was all that was really on our mind. We had our competitive group and competitive mindset where we'd be grinding games to figure out what the best deck was to get good enough to perform well. But in this day and age, the idea of being able to be a little bit more of a personality and kind of carry that over is something that appealed to me. I had a brief amount of period where I played in esports and streamed and did all that sort of stuff, so it came a little bit naturally to me. And I just kind of started, expanding it a little bit and being more so than, well, if I can explain to my teammates the plays that they should be making in any spot, then why don't I kind of expand that out and start teaching people? And that's where we started the Metafy, started the YouTube, all that sort of stuff. And ever since then, it's obviously been extremely successful.
Yeah, very much so. We were talking to Coco a little bit about you guys recently opening up your VIP section. I think it was for like another 50 people or something like that. So Metafy has definitely blown up. Your YouTube content's just been flying. I've been trying to stay up as much as I can on all the video releases and deck tech. So it's been just really, really healthy to see the Riftbound community kind of grow and supportive.
Would you say that Challenger TCG for you guys, like I know that you were kind of referring back to when it was a small group of friends, that were just trying to play games together, right? Build a good, community around that sense. But it's really become something much larger than that in the eyes of the community, right? Like we kind of see you guys as these big titans, a huge pillar of what the expectation is as far as, the competitiveness, the player attitude in game, outside of game, and the willingness to share knowledge. Would you say that it is where you thought it would be when you guys first started this, or did it far exceed what you imagined it being?
Well, the only thing I can say is the competitive player that I am, I strive to be the best in everything that I knew. So I knew that Challenger TCG, as soon as I picked it up with the friends that I did, that we were going to be the biggest name in Riftbound in terms of a team. But I never expected it to get as big as it did, obviously, so quickly. Even comparing to some of the platforms like One Piece or other games and their biggest platforms. I know I've talked to some of the other One Piece creators, and we're bigger than even that game, which is crazy, seeing as that game's been out for so long. I think it's just kind of a testament to the quality of product that we're putting out, at least from everything that we've heard. We've obviously had extremely high retention rate. Everybody has been, very, very kind joining the community. And I think we do everything that we can to, I don't want to say product because that sounds a little bit weird, but it kind of is that we're offering services to anyone who's really looking to get that leg up on Riftbound. And I think it really works a lot better in the TCG space as opposed to something like esports or otherwise, because those are more just hobbies, and it's a lot harder to justify spending money on a subscription for something that's just a hobby. And it's like, oh, maybe I'll go from diamond to master and league, but that doesn't really do anything for you financially. In this game, I mean, I can't even count the number of people who are our subs who's just been like, yeah, I used your lists and I was able to go 6-0 at the pre-RQ, which gives you, a metal card worth a couple $1,000s. Like, what's $20 a month that you're spending, or even $100, $150 a month for our highest tier? If you're doing that and then getting a single metal card that won you $2,000, like, it's much easier to justify that sort of subscription in a card game if you really need that help leveling up. So I think that part's been a pretty much a slam dunk, as opposed to, like I said, other games where you don't really get that return on your investment. We've really seen so many people who have talked to us that were just our subs. They used the information that we gave and they performed extremely well. We even had one of our subs in Vegas was able to top 4 using my Draven list. I think he changed like 2 cards or something like that because, personal preference and all that. But it was incredible just to see everyone that's succeeded based on the information that we're able to give out,
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize like how much content is in some of these. Like, you guys offer free guides, obviously, but it's not just a deck list. It's not like, hey, just play this list. Like, there's sideboard, there's matchup tech, there's really a deep thirst of knowledge that you're gaining from your information that you're providing, and there's also a very close attachment to you guys and the craftsmen as well. So there's like this kind of ebb and flow of information. It's, for a couple coffees a month is pretty easily doable. And like you were saying, like the financial gain and ability to quickly prize up versus having to grind for season after season in, like, say, League of Legends, where you're just going up a rank or two. Mm-hmm. Most people aren't going to get to a semi-pro level in that aspect. But with Riftbound and how new it is, it's very easy to get to that prize. A lot of our viewers aren't necessarily used to understanding like a team structure and kind of what goes into running a team with a TCG or even esports. Could you maybe talk about like the structure and team dynamic that Challenger TCG has, kind of what roles people play and how you ended up kind of building what you've built so far?
I mean, our team, honestly, like I said, we operate a little bit as partially as a business, partially as a group of friends, partially as like a testing thing, when it comes to handling everything through our Discord Metafy. That's more of the business side of things, where obviously my big goal is to help my friends out. So, we'll have occasional people like you mentioned, you've already interviewed Coco. He'll do some coaching for us as well on the business side of things. And, we leave it open to our team to be able to write guides as well, so long as obviously I read through them and make sure that they're up to our standards. As I want to make sure we're releasing the best guides and such that we can. But then, I think right now they might be working on like a pike guide, for example, I believe is one that some of my guys are working on from the business side. And in terms of, like just being a group of friends, it really is just that sometimes we just hop and call and have fun, talk about whatever nonsense while people are testing in the background. It really just comes down to everyone having their own goals. And I think as part of the difficulty in Riftbound as opposed to others, that's been a struggle for some of our competitors, such as like Alan and Prismat and all them, is that this is a game that very much so rewards you being a specialist in a specific deck, right? Not only for the best of prizing, but also for, the fact that you're playing something rogue. People aren't going to know how to play into you. Obviously, being a person, the only person on the planet that plays my deck, right? Having my very unique take on Sett that's performed extremely well. It obviously part of being on a team is that my friends have to test against me, and for them, they aren't getting as much out of that, right? Because they're not going to run, unless they run into literally me across the table, they're not going to get any extra value of testing the Sett Kingpin matchup. But on the flip side, as soon as they help me out with whatever specific matchup, if I needed to run into Diana or LeBlanc or whatever, they'll test me out with that. And then when they have their specific deck, when Coco wants to test his Pike deck, for example, then I'll do the same for him. I'll run whatever deck that he wants. And fortunately for us, we're all competent enough players and competitive enough that we know how to play pretty much any deck, at least to, a reasonable enough degree. I don't think that testing ever needs to be at a point where you're playing against somebody who is literally the best and making perfect plays, because once you get into an actual tournament scene, nobody's ever going to play perfectly against you, right? Outside of like maybe top 8 the finals. So
yeah,
I think that's a lot of it, is that we're kind of just here as a team to help each other succeed. We all obviously have our own individual goals, and we all want to individually win our own medal prize cards and stuff, but we really it's almost like a family to a degree for everybody that's on the team, because we're all looking out for each other, doing whatever we can to prop everyone up and make sure everyone succeeds. So
that's really cool to hear. Do you think that there goes with these like testing with teams from just jamming with a group of friends, what separates the jamming with the group of friends with actual testing, and what does I know you described you guys run games. What does the day kind of look like for you when you're in a hard grind mode versus the maybe more just like casual player that's just kind of doing their thing online?
Yeah, for me, I tend to go with a set goals in mind, I guess. Obviously, this is going to become a big thing once Sett 4 comes out, as Sett 4 will be a simultaneous release set, being that previously, like in Sett 2, there was like a month and a half of lead where they were in China, right, where they had access to all these cards, and we were able to look at that information and at least have a baseline as to what was going to be good for Sett 2, right? Sett 3, a little bit less so, as their first regional overlapped with our first regional. So we didn't really have quite as much, even though they had the product a little bit earlier, we didn't have quite as much information going into Sett 3. And we kind of saw that with the first event, obviously being an extremely wide field compared to previous events, with I think the highest represented deck being at about 7%, right? So I think one thing for us is obviously kind of pioneers and being able to do this full time, fortunately, and having a good group of people is that I take that information and kind of extrapolate it into, well, now previously I could just kind of run through whatever was doing well in the China events and then test that as a baseline. Now we're going into it completely blind, having to figure out what we think is inherently powerful. And I think for us, at least, it comes down to two things. Obviously, as I've already previously mentioned, this is a game that rewards you for being a specialist in one specific legend. So if for anyone on the team just really likes the artwork of a character, really likes the domain combination, really likes the ability on one of the legends, then maybe that they'll just pick that up and they'll just grind through it, because fortunately, it's if so long as the deck is, you're the best at that deck and you perform the best in the event, then you're getting the only prizing thing that matters in Riftbound, which being the best of, right? But on the competitive side as well, obviously, I want to know what the best decks are. And I think I've gotten very good at identifying that at a glance, even on some of the things that are kind of underlooked, obviously, with my Sett deck being something that no one else has really been able to put up numbers on. And then obviously going into Sett 3, it released the LeBlanc guide. And then turns out we have one guy who plays it and he was the best of LeBlanc. But I knew he was going to be the best of LeBlanc, so there was no reason for any more of us to play more than one of them, right? Because then we're just destroying our own prizing. So I was just like, you know what? Hey, Daniel was like, oh yeah, I want to play LeBlanc. And I was like, you got it. I'll play my Sett deck. You'll get
It's
the best of
yours.
force. And
Yeah.
But obviously my flavor of LeBlanc was one that was not really talked about previously, as the Hook LeBlanc was not something that was, previously discussed, but I dropped the guide on it. And then, we obviously ended up being the best of LeBlanc. So,
Love to see that you guys are generating a powerhouse. When you guys are kind of deck teching and kind of really, now that there's not a lead of information coming out of China, how do you guys handle like disagreements with inside the team dynamic? And is it kind of a group effort when you guys are deck designing? Is there kind of somebody that's kind of spearheading and more of the mastermind behind the deck techs, or is it kind of more of a group effort?
yeah, I would say each person in our team has things that they're very good at and things that they're very bad at. And I'd say for the vast majority of our team, they aren't exactly deck builders. I think deck building is a very difficult skill for a lot of people, but I personally am probably one of our lead deck builders and designers, which is why I tend to prioritize writing the guides. As again, I kind of understand card games on a fundamental level to the point where I'm able to build these deck lists pretty easily. And, they'll never be perfect, but that's one thing that I always try to tell people who are so obsessed with lists and such, and making sure they have the exact perfect 64 cards, is that, it's not exactly that important if your deck's one or two cards off, especially if you have a sideboard card that's just not doing anything. For example, at Sydney, I had a lone camel in my sideboard that I never boarded in, never did anything. And obviously it didn't matter. I was still able to get ninth and be best of Sett, but it was just a dead card in my sideboard. And just because I didn't get enough time to test with it and stuff. But the important thing whenever going into deck building is making sure that you have a core strategy in mind, and every card in that deck is there to work towards that strategy, right? When it comes to my Sett deck, it's built around the idea of wanting to set up a unbreakable wall. And even when you do break it, it just gets saved by the Sett and the kind of legend ability, and it's just kind of grinds your opponent out until they're out of resources, right? So every card in my deck is built around that idea. That's why I play buff spells to make combat more difficult. I'm forcing my opponent to get into combat as much as possible. I have buff providers such as Arena Bar, so that once I do use my legend ability, they can get right back out there. Cards like Irresistible Faithful being the new one is just a way, is like spot removal is a part of the holding strategy because of tank and stuff. It's all a very synergistic piece, and anyone who sees the deck that at least talked to has been like, I understand why all the cards are here. It's just a little bit too complicated for the majority of people to play because it is a very difficult deck. And the LeBlanc deck was really built the same way. I kind of saw how every LeBlanc was running and operating, and they were on a very aggressive style, which I still think is viable. And I've talked to people about it. I don't think the aggressive LeBlanc decks are bad if you enjoy that style. I just thought that essentially the way that I worded it in my guide and explained it to people was LeBlanc was in a very weird spot where she had an extremely powerful early game, right? Being able to conquer and duplicate something. Kind of a weak mid game is that she doesn't really have much in terms of combat buff outside of like the Vi that you play 1 or 2 copies of. And then a very powerful late game where you're like duplicating your Rexes and doing all this sort of stuff. But her early game was very easily shut down to cards like Flurry of Blades or Gust, just making it so that you had like a bad early game and a bad mid game if your opponent was playing any of these cards that countered her. So again, going back to my fundamentals, I kind of was like, okay, well, if we can play around stuff like that by just leaning more into our late game, for example, then we can potentially create a deck that just doesn't worry about the scoring the early points or getting behind on points, and then create like a fundamental lock based on baited hooks and duplicating and making a crazy board. So that was the strategy that we tried. And as soon as somebody gets an idea like that on the team, then we just kind of run it through the gauntlet. And if it performs well, then, we bring it to an event and win a best of prize. So that's kind of the general philosophy that I go with, is to just come up with some sort of core idea, something that works in the domain or with the legend identity, and just run it through. And if it ends up being bad, then we've had plenty of bad ideas that we've scrapped and nobody will ever hear of. But all it takes is the one good one, right? And that's what really matters.
Exactly.
Kind of keep throwing stuff at the wall, see what sticks, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So Challenger TCG has become stacked with a lot of different talent. We've heard a lot of different names out there. What is your guys' current roster before we get right into the deck building and stuff, or too heavy into the deck building and the reason you chose certain cards? What's your guys' like current roster?
Sure. So there's, at least in terms of players, as those are the ones that really matter, we do have one silent partner to a degree who handles all of our like social media and stuff. His name's Matt. Nice guy. He handles all of like our Discord moderation, Twitter, stuff like that, but he doesn't really play Riftbound. So unless you end up joining the Discord, it's pretty rare that you'll interact with him. Then myself and Anton are the other order owners. Obviously, if you all are watching this, you probably know me to some degree. Anton was the 2 most recent Best of Volley Bears, and he's kind of been the Aurora guy. He also does all of our video editing and stuff like that. And then beyond that, we have Alex, who I previously mentioned, Alex Vanderblen. He wrote our Brexide guide once upon a time, and he's been a big namestay in a lot of different card games. And he took a break from Riftbound and kind of comes in and out, but he is still an honorary member of the team. We have Rossum, who was the big pioneer of the Detonate Miracle Draven deck, winning back-to-back events. I believe it was like a PPG into like a 10K on Detonate Draven. He also top 64 in Vegas with it, so he had a really good run with that deck until it ended up getting, unfortunately, banhammered, or fortunately, depending upon your take, right? Daniel.
That deck definitely side-blinded a lot of people, too. That just came out of left field. It was great.
We still didn't believe that deck was very good, and we told everyone it wasn't very good, and Miracle Dragon was better, but that was, a story for another time. Daniel as well. Daniel Zeidenberg is one of our better performing members as well. He's a good friend of mine that I've been playing card games with for a long time. Obviously, he got second at Houston, top forward in France, and then most recently got top 8 on my LeBlanc list. So very, very good player, obviously very consistent. I think he was the first person as well to win 3 different medals, as he got Yi, Draven, and LeBlanc. So that was pretty cool. Then we have Coco, as you've already previously mentioned. He obviously got second at Atlanta on Draven and won one of the Charlie's events. He's been around card games for a long time. Obviously a fantastic player, so we were happy to pick him up. We picked him up with Min, who at the Charlie's that he won, I think Min was in the finals against him, or maybe he lost in top 4 with me. But he's also a old-time Magic player who's I believe he won a Grand Prix, won a couple of other big events as well, and has just kind of transitioned into Riftbound with Coco. They're both friends that live in the same city, so we were happy to pick both of them up. Then we have our friend Trevor, who top 64'd in Houston once upon a time, and is kind of like he's a good friend of ours who hasn't been able to come out to as many events. I know he's at the Charlie's this weekend, so hopefully he does well there. But he's been very insurmountable to helping our team do all these testings and, helping us with all of our random nonsense decks. So shout out to him. And then we have Cody as the best of Victor in Houston, who has kind of, again, similar to Alex, he comes in and out of playing the game because Flesh and Blood is his main squeeze. But he's still a member of the team that we love hanging out with and having around. But he was, best of Victor in Houston. And unfortunately, he's had to take a break from Riftbound for a little while, but hopefully we'll see him competing again soon. So, and then those are like the main core members of the team. We also have Zane, the owner of TopDeck.gg, who is a member of the team as well. He got top 64 at Atlanta. So whenever he's able to play, he does. But I think that mostly covers our team.
This is a star-studded roster. It's very nice to kind of see a professional team kind of come together and so many accolades among you guys, and just kind of really the history. I mean, like you said, there's old heads there playing, Magic and playing older games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Versus you've got some of the players playing some of the newer games like Flesh and Blood. So
yeah,
it's really cool to see.
It really was just one of those things. Like the core cast was myself, Daniel, Alex, and Anton. The 4 of us kind of started from the most recent game that we played, being a game called Battle Spirits that nobody's ever heard of. And if you have, I'm sorry. But they did a $1 million circuit. It was ran by Bandai, and nobody heard of the game. So it was very easy to farm. So we all did very well in that game. We just kind of moved over to Riftbound as a new thing. And then from there, it was just, we showed up to random events, talked to people we were like-minded with, obviously, I think Cody was our first pickup in Houston, where he got the Victor and he was hanging out with us. So we talked and we added him on. And then, Trevor, I think, was the next one where we showed up to one of the Star City Games events that he did pretty well at. I just played him in the last round. I could tell he was a good player and he just wanted a team to play with. So we picked him up, and then, Rossum, I think, was at the Pro Play Games 25K. That was after one of the events. Maybe it was Houston or something like that, back in December. And he talked to us there, so we picked him up. And then, Coco and Min were kind of the same thing, where I think I got top 4 at the Charlie's event that Coco won. So we talked to him, and we're like, hey, you seem to be pretty good at this game. We're looking to pick some people up. And yeah, that was really all it was. The rest is history. People who've performed well, have continued to perform well. Obviously, we picked up Rossum before he did any of the Detonate stuff, and then he was able to perform. So I think it's one of those things that good card game players are able to recognize good card game players. So I just try to do everything I can to prop up my players to let them be the best they can, and obviously it's succeeded for us so far.
Yeah, we found that they kind of gravitate towards each other. Like-minded individuals will always seem to find each other. If you'd like, we can transition a little bit into kind of the other thing you are also known for, which is heavily being associated with the best of Sett and kind of the Sett daddy of the Riftbound community. What originally attracted you to kind of Sett as your legend? And for newer players, what should they consider when choosing their own legend?
I think everyone has a different kind of take when it comes to deck building and choosing your deck identity. for me, I mean, I had a brief stint where Draven was kind of the tier 0 deck, and obviously I played Miracle Draven and top forward in Vegas when that was the case. So I wasn't always just the Sett guy. As the one thing that I like to put out there is, you know, I am multifaceted. I did make the LeBlanc deck that was able to top 8 in Sydney, so it just so happens that I think Sett's my one unique thing right now. So I've been kind of enjoying it and just want to see how well I can do with Sett while he's still around, right? But everybody always makes fun of me. Oh, you're just a Sett guy, or at least on the team. Obviously, it's not the case, but that's the one thing I'm trying to avoid. You know, I don't want Sett to rotate out, and then it'll be like, oh, nobody even remembers me anymore. But it originally started with Sett 1, where it's kind of a long-winded story, but for previous card games, right, the main thing was that there was no reason to ever play anything but the best deck, or whatever you think had the best odds of you topping an event, right? There's no best of pricing in the majority of card games. There's no best of pricing for Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon or any of the previous games that we played. So the way that you would approach it is you would just see whatever the best deck is, and that's going to be the most popular, right? We've seen it with One Piece most recently. I think is just one that I've heard numbers on, where, you know, purple and L is like 40% of the field, and then the next best deck is like 25%. So, you know, it's a very narrow field that you're going into, which is when I originally approached Riftbound, what I thought it would be, right? Kai'Sa was the boogeyman, and I was trying to find some sort of strategy to beat Kai'Sa consistently. As, you know, if you can play the best deck and do well with it, then great. But if you can also play something that just auto wins against the best deck and is still good into everything else, then obviously that's even better. And that's kind of where I came to it, as I like to be, you know, whenever it's just trying to counter a deck, the way that you do it is you're like, okay, what does this deck struggle with? And we found that it struggled with like Zhonya's Hourglass out of Master Yi, as well as the big might numbers that were able to be put up out of Master Yi. So that's kind of where I found Sett, and using Kingpin instead of Brawler, as if you're able to go Arena Bar into Kingpin, then you're immediately a 7, which was like the perfect number because you traded with the Darius, and then obviously it just gets saved anyways. It also was out of range of Falling Star and Singularity, so that was just kind of my approach in Sett 1 before the game even came out. And I was like, okay, well, if everyone's going to play Kai'Sa, I'll try and play this. It seems like a little bit more interesting. And obviously it worked. I won the first event playing that set list. So yeah, that was my original approach. And then into Sett 2, I kind of took a break from it to play Draven. I wanted to obviously top some events, get my invites and all that. So I did that for a bit, and, you know, I top 60 forward, and every event I was on Draven or top forward in Vegas as well to get my invites. But the pricing obviously is not very good if you don't get a best of. My top 4 in Vegas, I think I got like 1,500 cash, and then Blade of the Rune King that I sold for like 2K. So, you know, compared to getting some of these best ofs that I'm sure people have seen the price of these days is obviously not quite worth the squeeze. So since then, and going to Atlanta, I just decided, you know what, Sett was my old guy that was doing well for me. Why don't I give him another shot? And obviously it's done well with me getting top 8 at Atlanta, and now 9th at the Sydney event, which normally 9th would be like a heartbreaker, but I at least knew going into the last round I was going to end up getting 9th anyways, so it wasn't too big of a deal, and I got to walk away with my best of. So as we've already mentioned, that's all that matters.
Yeah, we were tracking you for a little bit there because we run kind of up to date leaderboards for the events, and we saw your name pop up towards the end. We're like, oh man, he is just on the cusp. He is right there. And at one point you were on the leaderboard in first place, and we're like, dude, he's gonna be top 8. This would be so sick. So we were a little sad to see you just get squeezed out there. But I mean, you've been traveling so much and kind of going back to back with these events. Like the fact that you guys are, yourself and the team as well, consistently in the top 10 every time, it's just really impressive and a testament to kind of the work you guys are putting in.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that I think, as I already mentioned, you're much better off if you have your unique deck that has been performing well for you, that works for you. I'm always going to be a proponent, as somebody, like I mentioned, who plays a Sett list that is even unique to Sett, right? Everyone else is on Sett Brawler as their chosen champion. Hopefully it inspires people to try their own unique strategy and approach to the game, and it works out for them like it does for me.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I myself am a Sett enjoyer. I have been since Sett 1. I've bounced back and forth between Kingpin and the Brawler, but in your opinion, what are some of the biggest mistakes that Sett players make? And then are there any matchups where you look across the table and you're like, oh, I'm so glad that I got this deck across from me?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue I think a lot of people run into with my deck is, and why no one's really been able to perform with it as well, is that it's a very unique style of play, I suppose. That's kind of different than what most people are used to, right? Where it's built to not only be able to break into a battlefield, but also actually hold it with decent might numbers. So a lot of it's being able to understand the format very well and know exactly what your opponent's options are to be able to break you next turn and to be able to play around that efficiently. And I think that that's something that is very difficult for people, because it's not only being able to know what you're going to potentially be able to do on my turn so that I can break into these battlefields easy enough, but also setting up my boards with perfect might numbers so that they match with exactly the cards that my opponent has access to in their deck. So it really works for me very well as somebody who has an encyclopedic knowledge of the game to know every card that my opponent potentially even could have. I can set up my boards accordingly, but obviously that's not something that is easy for anyone else to do on the list, and why I think it's been difficult for people. One of the buffs I have for being able to play this game full time, right?
Right.
So I think that's the big thing that I've seen, at least, that's been a struggle for people who are playing my specific list. And why I think Sett has, I don't know, it's just been difficult for a lot of people who've obviously messaged me and asked about the list.
It's a very tough matchup. I mean, just even in our testing alone, like when we're just running game after game and running different decks, because Corey's going to be up in Vancouver coming up. It's one of the harder matchups, I think, consistently. Like, yeah, there's a couple of tough matchups for it, but they're not even that tough. It's like game 1 might be tough, but game 2 and 3 just gets way easier for Sett. But yeah, it's definitely hard, and there's a lot of math involved. And like you said, if once you stabilize the board for Sett and you place the right pieces, it can be very hard to get over. And if you do, it's like then the resetability of Sett and then be able to recover is very, very high comparative to some other decks. So I don't think a lot of people understand the dynamic of how to play into Sett. A lot of people probably go into it thinking, oh, it's just Fiora. And it's like,
yeah,
it's definitely not just Fiora.
Yeah, it definitely plays very differently. And it's just one of those things as well. Like, I think that if it's also one of the more difficult decks, in my opinion, just because if you do make a mistake in some other decks, there's the ability to recover. In Sett, there's not. If you ever make a mistake playing Sett, then you just typically lose on the spot, because you're so invested into your Kingpin, for example. So if you make a mistake and you lose your Kingpin permanently, then the game's just over. You lose on the spot, right? So, but I personally like decks like that. I want a deck that gives me as much agency as possible. And if I lose the game, I want it to be because I made a mistake, So that's what Sett's been for me.
So far. I feel the same way. So do you think that a lot of people think that Sett is a oversimplified deck on the outside? Like all they see is, well, you just punch, all you do is just might check and might check and might check. But when I'm playing the deck personally, I'm more playing my opponent's deck rather than trying to play my own, because I understand what my goal is my goal is to have one entity that has a lot of pressure, that has that I can dictate the pace, whether I'm slowing it down, speeding it up. But I feel like a lot of players, they just look at Sett and they're like, oh, well, all you do is just might check the whole time. And I'm like, well, no, I have to account for, like you said, there's a lot of math involved. with the amount of cards, and we're even getting new things with purple having the ability to bounce more units, stun more units. So that's becoming a lot more prevalent. What do you feel like the deck brings? Like, is it oversimplified on the outside, people looking in? Is it underestimated? Should it be played more? Because I love the deck. Personally, I love the way that it plays. It feels great. I've been a Sett player since League of Legends. Even when he first came out, I've just kind of rode along with him the whole way. So I love it personally, and I think that it's a very, very strong, or at least higher on what a lot of people put it on their tier lists.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, from what I've seen, they do respect the uniqueness of the deck, and so I've never really ran anyone that's been like too much of a hater, just saying like, oh, you just put up big might numbers and that's got to be so easy for you. I've never really ran
You're just
into
a buff, bro.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's more of the people just online that I'm playing against. Maybe they're just a little bit frustrated because they don't understand how to maneuver around the deck. But
Sure.
when we're doing our little bit of in-houses, these guys have been doing a great job helping me get prepped for Canada and everything, and it's been a really fun experience. And I kind of landed on a unique hybrid build that was a little bit of what I saw from you guys out in Sydney, but with my own little unique twist on it. Obviously, I'm a little bit more of a fan of Ruin Runner than you are, I think.
Sure.
I've got two in the main, but it's mostly just because when I was doing my testing, and I don't know if it's just the in-houses that I've been running with, but where I was seeing my struggles with the version that I've built, that's more my play style, getting targeted by a lot of that stuff, it's just really easy for me to just put Ruin Runner down and just let her do her thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and if it has
a slap a Trinity Force on that bad
yeah,
boy.
and I do run 2 Trinity Force, which probably might be a little bit more unique than people think, but just having a Trinity Force and a buff on a Ruin Runner and slapping it onto a battlefield, it becomes exceptionally difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
And it is the target that people have to focus on, rather than, and that kind of allows me as almost like a distraction to, build up Brawler, build up my backline, get the other units ready. So where do you see some of like the uniqueness going into some of deck building, and are we going to see you run Sett in Vancouver?
Yeah, we'll definitely be running Sett for the next 3 events, right? I got to try and get all the best subs while I can, so there's 3 more that are going to exist as far as I know. So that's my current intention, as a threat for anyone out there thinking of bringing Sett to an event. You at least got to compete with me for the best
Corey?
sub.
Yeah, I'll be looking forward to it.
But yeah, I think it really just comes down to specific matchups, right? Cards, especially like Ruin Runner, if you play into a deck that doesn't target at all, then that card's just terrible, right? So when you're going into a wide open field, I think it's more important to just have a core, consistent, powerful strategy where your cards are going to do kind of the same thing pretty much every time. Because say Ruin Runner's good into, I don't know, Diana and one other deck, that's still only going to be 10% of the field. You're going to play that happen one time, and then does that mean the 12 other matches that you're going to be playing, it's just a bad card? Sometimes, obviously, nothing's ever quite that simple or quite that black and white, but going into how the matchups work, there are 40 different legends that are in Riftbound right now. Like, being able to, obviously you want to prepare for the more competitive ones, such as Aurelia and LeBlanc and like Yi mid-range, but you still have to have a strategy that kind of works consistently enough into everything, so that when you play into the random deck, you don't just get got, right? So I think obviously the earlier rounds you're going to play against a lot more random stuff, but as you get into the higher tables, that's where you're going to have to play into a lot of the more meta relevant decks and act accordingly. So for the Sett version that I played, I do think that like Diana is one of the harder matchups where Ruin Runner could potentially be relevant, but at least from my experience, the reason why I haven't liked the card is that on a fundamental level anyways, it can only ever wall out one battlefield, and it takes a lot of investment in order for you ever to do that. And that's assuming that you're playing against a deck that just can't outmight you, which obviously it's pretty rare that you get outmighted in Sett. when cards like Punch First and Call the Glory exist. But that's at least my reasoning as to why I haven't liked it. Plus, it's very slow. So, you get to a point where you have to obviously play the card, and then you have to be able to untap with it before it even does anything. So one of those types of cards that you need in your opener for it to do anything. And I try to avoid cards like that as much as I possibly can, right? My top end, obviously, so far being Fey Dragon is something that at least comes out and immediately busts everything. And I can immediately put it onto a battlefield as well because it comes with its own buff. So I don't have to be worried about it. With Ruin Runner, you need to already have an arena bar established if you're trying to immediately put it onto a battlefield, which I think has been one of the things that's struggled with me. Plus, for my deck, I don't have any equipment. You mentioned Triforce. I think it makes cards like that a lot better. So that's been my specific reason for why I haven't liked the card. Obviously, I did have the win in the board, and that was just because Daniel was running this pack Ezreal combo deck that was just complete nonsense.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if I run into this, maybe I'll throw one Ruin Runner in here. I don't know what else I want in that last sideboard slot. So I full well knew going into the event it was very unlikely that I ever boarded it in. And turns out I didn't. But I was like, you know what? I'll just throw it in there as a Miser's copy. You never know what random nonsense you're going to run into, right? So.
I think that's what makes it hard with Riftbound too, is like you mentioned it about like broad stroking going into a tournament, and then also on a second level being prepared for like the top end, top 8. It's like this game is unique in the sense of like you only have 8 sideboard cards. So as this game progresses, let's fast forward, 6 months from now when we're a year into this, like being able to plan for every deck with 8 cards is going to get extremely, extremely hard. And so then you will have to kind of strategize of like, okay, I do want to be able to take care of this 60% of the meta, but I don't necessarily have a game plan for this 40%, or I match up well against this 40%, so I'm not really going to plan for the sideboard. But it's definitely hard to pick and choose kind of what you test against, I guess, because like obviously we're testing against like the best like top 5 or 6 decks, but then you go into a field and you run into like a Lux or a Garen or like a Lee Sin, and you're just like, I didn't necessarily plan for this matchup. I didn't really have a game plan. Like I know how it plays, but you can't always be prepared for it. So do you maybe want to mention how you plan for sideboarding, how you approach a wide field and the top 8, and if there's like any tips that new players can consider when they're kind of choosing their sideboard?
Yeah, I think at the best thing you can do if you really want to get into it, and say we had theoretically infinite time, is obviously to map out each matchup. The way I always recommend it is to think of sideboarding not as necessarily as silver bullets in this game, because you can't just be playing silver bullets for one specific matchup. And because they're 40 decks, so if you're devoting even just one sideboard slot, that's 12% of your sideboard that you're devoting to one of what is in theoretically 2.5% of the potential field. Obviously numbers end up being a little bit higher for some specific legends, but that's why I try to focus a little bit more on general cards. But you also, if as you already mentioned, like if you're going into a field where you're already well positioned, or you don't feel like there's any cards that you need to take out in any specific matchups, then you can get rid of those as things that you don't need to prepare for, right? So that's why I always be like, okay, well, take your deck list, right? And rather than being like, oh, I want this card against this deck, I want this card against this deck, don't go that way. Go with, okay, let me look through my 40 cards. What cards do I not want against, we'll say Aurelia? What cards do I not want against LeBlanc? And then if there are cards that you actively don't want into those matchups, say that Call the Glory out of my set list hasn't been performing for you very well into Aurelia because she just gets bigger or something like that. And you're like, okay, well, this is a card that hasn't been performing super well, and I can start looking for a card that would be better into that matchup. But if you're already to a point where you like every card in this specific matchup, then there's no reason for you to be devoting sideboard slots, because then you're just not even going to know what you want to take out in this specific matchup, right? So I say just like do like a quick rundown. Obviously, you can kind of match some things together. You match Lee Sin with Master Yi, as those decks are probably going to be pretty similar. Draven and Pike and Annie and all those decks, they do play a little bit differently, but the cards that they have access to are typically going to be very similar. Just how they use them will be a little bit differently, right? But at the same level, if they're cards that are bad against Annie, they'll probably be bad against Draven, they'll probably be bad against Pike, so on and so forth. So I'd say break things down a little bit more into specific domains and then just see, what cards you don't want against them. And then once you've kind of established that point and you see, okay, well, I need 3 cards against Aurora, I need 3 cards against Aurelia, so on and so forth, then you can start really developing and building your sideboard from there. As I think that's the best way to approach it. Obviously, there are exceptions. Like my sideboard has a bunch of Aurora hate because my main deck is already built for pretty much everything. But that's also just because I'm the world's biggest Aurora hater. So I never want to be losing to Aurora if I can avoid it. So
that's literally Corey's entire sideboard. It's just like, I'm going to bring in 8 cards that just smash Aurora. Like game 1, it's harder the cards Yugi over there, but game 2 and game 3 for you guys against Aurora gets so much better.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of value out of Ash as a card in general, just because you can kind of pick what you want, whether it's the dazzling or maybe he's on a pitch for like Mind Splitter or something where you don't want to reveal your hand or get rid of what you want. And then 2 salvage, 2 auction, and sabotage as well. And those have been working really well for me, at least. And then we've seen a lot of uniqueness with the Victor Portal Ash, where they can flash it and do it twice. Do you have any specific cards that you think would be valuable in after this closed vacuum, like after we get Vendetta? Is there a card, maybe if you could design a card specifically for Sett, what do you think that card would be and what would you have it do?
It's hard to say. I'm not really one to design cards as much as I am like a player. The way that my brain works, I think everyone has their few things that they're good at and things they struggle with. For me, I never considered myself too creative. The reason why I think I've been good at card games is I'm very good at understanding a rule set. Like, you give me rules, you give me cards, you give me things to function with, and I will find you the best way to break those rules to make those things, or what the best strategy is within a given rule set. But creating things outside of a rule set has always been kind of a struggle for me, right? So
yeah, fair enough. So what's next on the docket for you and Challenger TCG?
Honestly, it's something we're gonna continue growing, and Riftbound will always be our primary focus, as I think that's obviously where we started and something that'll be near and dear to our hearts for a very long time. So that's something that we will always be prioritizing over anything else. But we have seen, at least on the announced schedule, that there is some downtime coming up. So at least I personally am going to try a couple of different side quests. I just got into all the regionals for August for One Piece, so I'm going to give that one a shot and see how it goes. Maybe it goes well, maybe it goes poorly. Who knows? It's not something I've ever played, so I just had a lot of friends, obviously, meeting card game players. If they play one card game, they play another. So everyone was like, oh, you got to try One Piece. The pricing's been crazy. Then outside of that, I did
kind
back,
of bonkers.
Yeah, I did back the Kickstarter for Cyberpunk that I believe is coming out in September, October, somewhere around there. I backed that for. I split one of the 8K bundles that they had, so maybe I'll try that whenever they end up having a tournament structure. And wherever we end up succeeding in card games, maybe there'll be a Challenger TCG branch to follow for people who are interested in those types of card games as well. So
yeah, I was gonna say we're gonna see the documentation of your run into One Piece, and I know that Cyberpunk was very, very interesting. So we had a couple of local guys who printed off some cards early, and we're kind of testing that TCG. So that seems to have some good backing. So hopefully it does well. My only hesitation with that is I don't know how long the longevity of that game can be just based on its IP. But again, we've seen other TCGs do well for a couple of years, so hopefully it has some traction there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the belief that obviously IPs are something that can help you initially sell the game, but if you make a game that's good enough and people continue playing it, then you can. The limitations of an IP become not that big of a deal because your card game can become the IP now if it becomes big enough, right? You start making sets or ideas specifically just for your card game if the card game itself is successful enough. So I think that at least from my understanding, the tournament structure of Cyberpunk should be very interesting. I know that the creator of that game actually was like a former employee or owner of UVS who has helped work on Riftbound, so it'll have very similar pricing, such as the metal cards and stuff like that. And best of pricing is, I believe, that was something that originally the guy pitched. So I think it's something that we'll see as well, and so that's why I was like, if it's similar enough, similar people are running it, then I might as well give it a shot. So whenever their tournament structure ends up coming out, I'll go for that, and then in the meantime, I'll try One Piece. The one reason I never got into One Piece is because it's best of one. I think best of one games have very high variance. Obviously, it's winning the die roll becomes that much more important when it's just one game, right? Imagining Riftbound and best of one, I don't even want to think about that, right?
That's why I'm so jealous of the China meta. When they're just best of one all the time, I'm just like, oh man, it'd be so different from a competitive scene. So
yeah. This game, at least because of the leaders, has like some pre-boarding options, I believe is what they're doing over in China now. And they're trying to figure out ways to make it work. It is cool from everyone who's played One Piece. They're like, oh yeah, you get out of the event hall by like 5 or 6 sometimes. And things just go quick and you can actually get some real dinner. And I'm like, okay, well, that sounds nice rather than being out until 11 p.m., being there for 13, 14 hours. But I think that's one of the advantages I have as a player as well, is that I'm very used to running through these long tournaments, so I never really get the mental fatigue that other people do. So that's why I'm not too hopeful with One Piece, just because it's kind of the antithesis of everything that I'm used to, right? Where it's a lot more. I don't know if casual friendly is the way to put it, but it's just easier to go through these events when you're playing all the games so quickly. You don't have the long ice out periods that Riftbound has, where we have basically 2-hour rounds that are getting flipped sometimes, hour and 40 minutes. I think that's where, there's lots to come to card games, not just about playing the game perfectly, but also being
100%.
able to mentally get through a tournament, knowing what to do to keep your mental up and not make these mistakes. Because I think mistakes get made not just based on knowledge, but also how you mentally are at any given point. You go on tilt, you're going to start playing worse. For some people, if they're too hungry, they'll start playing worse. So having to find your way to manage all of that through a tournament, I think, is very important. So
yeah, I think that's what a lot of players misunderstand, is like sometimes there's a game within inside a game. When we were talking to like Prismaticism, and he talked about like playing not just the deck but the opponent, and the same thing goes with like longevity into tournaments. There's a cadence, there's a pace with mental fatigue. Some players aren't eating, some people aren't drinking, some players aren't used to bright lights or the grind of 14 hours. And so I do think you're going to find yourself like crushing through faster tournaments. You're like, wait, there's only 30 minutes in a round. Like I can get through this. I can get to 2 back-to-backs, like 2 tournaments in the day. Like, is there another LGS I could go to real quick?
yeah.
So Collin, do you have any shout outs, any socials you'd like to plug, projects that you guys are going to be working on? Now would be the time to give those shout outs, any appreciation, teammates, that kind of stuff. Just let it rip.
Obviously we're Challenger TCG on everything. Definitely drop us a follow on X, YouTube, and then Medify is our main platform for the all of our exclusive content that we do. It's $20, I think, is the base level to get into the Discord. You also get half off all the guides. And getting into the Discord, you get access to all of our deck lists, which is like the big thing that, whenever people are wondering what I'm playing at an event, Well, if you're in the Discord, it's right there in this dedicated channel. I use the same Piltover archive link for everything and then just exported it from there so that I never even have to worry about it. If you want to know what I'm playing for an event, it's right there, right? You want to know what Daniel's playing for an event, it's right there. So, and outside of that, we answer any questions that people have directed for us in Discord. So we do think it is a very good product for people that are interested in kind of leveling up or getting that information when it comes to Riftbound, right? And then obviously we have our higher tiers as well for coaching, our Challenger tier being our kind of more exclusive tier that we're working on figuring out the logistics of getting more slots open. But if people are interested in it, then feel free to ping one of us and or DM me, and I'm sure I can find a way to get people in. So yeah, and that's obviously been extremely successful for us. Everyone's loved the classes. We've had a I think over 90% retention rate so far in the first month that we started it. So yeah, and that's working more towards the exclusive content, the exclusive classes of leveling people up so that they can perform well at these events. And while the price can seem high for a lot of people, all it takes is getting one medal card based on what's in there, right? And you're up infinite, right? And these cards sell for 15.
That's several years worth of subscriptions at that point, fellas.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's something that we try to offer as much as we can, and we're very customer service. I've owned a shop for 6 years, so I want everyone to be happy with the product. So if people truly feel like they didn't get their money's worth, then DM me and I'll give you your money back. It's not that big of a deal. So
I love that. It's a very obtainable pricing. Like a lot of people, I think, are off put by a subscription service. But again, if you're out there buying a Red Bull or a coffee every day, like if it's just a couple of those a month, and you're getting access to not only the deck list, but an in-depth perspective on how to sideboard, what matchups are good and favored, how to play them, and then really, I guess, getting close to you guys as well as another huge thing, as well as being on the pulse of kind of the competitive scene and how to take that edge. So I do think it's a pretty good high stacked value.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously we've proven it with this set that we at least know what we're talking about in terms of what is competitive. We knew based on, if you look at our earlier tier lists, we were right on the money with what was actually successful. We put Sivir as the lone S tier, and lo and behold, it had the highest win rate of any deck there. Then pretty much everything else in A tier that performed pretty well. So we know what we're talking about, I promise. And being in the Discord, you can always ping any of us to ask any questions you have. So I think that's definitely worth it.
Yeah, I think the proof is in the pudding. It's going to kind of wrap it up here for episode 7. As always, thank you again, Collin, for joining us and sharing your journey through competitive TCGs, how you built Challenger TCG, what it kind of takes to run a team, and really just breaking down some competitive high-level Riftbound. I'm going to be kind of super excited to see what the team brings to Vancouver. I love the fact that we're going to get some back-to-back events, and I know we kind of take a small break in July, which you mentioned too, where you're going to kind of open up to some other things. But again, thank you for sharing your insights. Please go ahead and like, subscribe, follow all the socials that Collin just mentioned. Hit us up on the podcast. And as always, this is my co-host, Corey. Thanks our guest, Collin, and we'll see you guys on the Rift.